Good morning, homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. Thanks for joining me in my kitchen. I have been craving red chili. I was talking to a friend the other day about living in Albuquerque, and the question that you always are asked anywhere in New Mexico when you order Mexican food, because it's not Mexican food, it's new Mexican food. It's a slightly different take on traditional Mexican food. The question that they ask you all the time is red or green, meaning do you want your dish with green chili or do you want your dish with red chili? And then you can order it as Christmas if you want both. It's a slight head start, but just barely. I am more of a fan of the red chili than I am of the green chili. And so years ago, I learned how to make homemade red chili sauce. And it's made with dried chilies. And the chilies that I'm going to use today are my own chilies that I grew from the garden. And so these are hatch-style chilies. The variety of this pepper is called Joe Parker, and it's an Anaheim type. Anaheim is a big group of chilies, and there's many, many different varieties or cultivars. This one is called Joe Parker. It's kind of a mild to medium heat, and they're roasted, picked and roasted green for green chilies, and then if you let them get ripe on the vine and then dry them, they are red chilies. And so this is a classic red chili, and we're going to make a beautiful red chili sauce out of this. And I'm going to have it over some eggs this morning, but I'm also probably going to make some pork adobado with the rest of it. So come join me. All right, so what I have here is the equivalent of about 12 New Mexico chilies. They are normally this sized. This is kind of a typical size, or even a little longer than that. Because these are homegrown chilies, I just dried everything that had turned red, and so some of them are pretty tiny, some of them are a little bit curved, some of them I had to cut the bottom off, so this is kind of an amalgamation, but it's the equivalent of about 12 large New Mexico chilies. And so what I'm going to do is just clean these and stem and seed them, and then we're going to put them in a blender with some hot water. And when you're doing this, you don't have to get every single seed out, but it's helpful to get most of them out. And when I dry these chilies, I slice them down the side. It makes them dry much faster in the dehydrator, which is the main reason that I do it, but it also makes them easier to clean. And so let me find it. There's an example. So you can see how this has been slit down the side. They're not normally like that when you buy them in the grocery store. It takes about twice as long to dry them if you don't cut them to let some of that airflow into the inside. Basically, the outside of this chili acts like a raincoat, and it holds the moisture in the plant, which is, what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to help keep it fresh on the vine. Oh shoot, I just put that in the wrong spot. Yeah, so this outside basically is a little bit waxy and acts a bit like a raincoat. It takes a long time to dry chilies if you don't give them an opening. And thankfully the seeds in these are mostly at the top, so it doesn't take a lot. So my husband and I lived in the Four Corners area near Durango for many, many years, and that area is very influenced by New Mexico culture. And we also spent quite a bit of time down in Albuquerque and Santa Fe and Taos because it was close. Albuquerque was actually our closest airport. People think Colorado, they just assume Denver. Albuquerque was 4 hours away. Denver was 7 hours away from where we were living. And so we were much closer to Albuquerque. And so we used to do quite a bit of vacationing down in that part of the world and absolutely fell in love with the food. And there was a little town on the way to Albuquerque called Cuba, and there was a restaurant there. I'll put the name of it up on the screen if they're still open. I think they are, called Bruno's. And Bruno's had the best adobado on the planet. It was just life-changing. It was so good. Adobado is just pork and green chilies stewed together. And we would actually, if we had to fly out of Albuquerque, we would leave 2 hours ahead of when we actually needed to be there so that we could stop and have lunch at El Bruno's because it was so good. And the original restaurant was in this old kind of building that had been added onto and redone, and it was full of beautiful artwork. It was this great mix of dive and authentic high-end. It was just a crazy experience to go there. And unfortunately, that restaurant caught fire and burned down. And so they moved across the street and took over an old Tasty Freeze, so basically an old drive-in burger joint, and then added on to that. And so it doesn't quite have the same weird, funky charm that the original did, but the food is still incredible. So that was how I decided I needed to learn how to make red chili, was having eaten that adobado and just falling in love with it. You can buy dried chilies in most grocery stores. I've lived all over the West, and I've literally never been anywhere that didn't have dried chilies in the grocery stores. Maybe that's just because there's such a Hispanic population in the western part of the United States. But I've never had a problem finding these. Sometimes they will be marked as New Mexico chilies. Sometimes they're marked as California chilies. Honestly, there's not a huge difference between those two things. You can use either one. And then depending on how close you are to Hatch, New Mexico, sometimes you can actually find dried chilies that say that they are Hatch dried chilies. Hatch is simply a town. It's not a specific variety of chili. But they do have, kind of like Walla Walla onions, which is where I'm living now. Part of what makes Walla Walla onions great is the soil that we have here, which is unique and very low in sulfur. The soil around Hatch, New Mexico is somewhat unique and part of why those chilies down there are so good. It's also pretty far south, and so it's excellent, excellent growing conditions for chilies. All right, you guys, I forgot I needed to boil these on the stove rather than just soak them. Different recipes have different methodologies. And so what I need here is 3.5 cups of boiling water. And I'm gonna put my broken up chilies in this pot, and I'm gonna cover them with 3.5 cups of water. And I'm gonna bring this to a simmer, and I'm gonna simmer these until they're rehydrated and pulpy, which is gonna take about 20 minutes. So I'll bring you back when those are almost done. Side note, I didn't wear gloves when I was cleaning those chilies because they're not that hot. Then I didn't wash my hands and I rubbed my nose, and now my nose is on fire. So maybe wear some gloves when you clean chilies. It's probably a good idea. All right, our chilies have been simmering for about 20 minutes. And you can see they are definitely reconstituted and looking good. I'm gonna transfer those over into our blender. And I'm gonna use a spider to transfer these without most of the liquid, because I'm not sure if I'm gonna want all of this liquid in my final sauce. And this way I can control that. Normally I would just strain these into one of my measuring cups, but all of my measuring cups happen to be in the dishwasher right now, or in use. So I started out with 3.5 cups of liquid. I'm down to just a little under 2 cups. So you can see how much that absorbed. And to this I'm gonna add, it calls for 2 cloves of garlic. These are a bunch of little tiny cloves that are starting to sprout, and so I'm just gonna throw them all in there to use them up. They're a little bit dried, and a little extra garlic isn't gonna hurt anybody. All right, I need a teaspoon of oregano, and Mexican oregano is preferred. Mexican oregano is a completely different plant than Italian oregano. It's actually in the verbena family. I need 2 teaspoons of sea salt. And that's gonna seem like a lot, but this sauce goes on other things, so it should be a little bit salty on its own. And then I'm gonna add in about half of this liquid. And usually that's all I need. I don't normally need more than that, but you can reserve it just in case. So I'm gonna want about a cup in there. All right, and then we are gonna blend this in our blender until we get a really nice paste. So in order to finish this sauce, we need to thicken it up a little bit. And so I need 2 tablespoons of oil, and you could use whatever oil you liked. I am gonna use lard today. This is home rendered lard, and I don't use it a lot, and so this just seemed like a really lovely opportunity and a very fitting choice. And what we're gonna do here is make a roux. And a roux is when you just put fat or oil and flour together and make a paste. You cook that raw flavor out of that flour, and then you add your liquid, and it's gonna thicken up. And I'm using this big pan, even though we don't have a ton of volume, just because when I add the liquid to this, it's gonna splatter like crazy. And so having high walls is a good idea. All right, so that's our roux paste. I'm gonna give that just another 30 seconds or so to cook out any raw flour flavor we got going on. And you can see we're getting just a tiny bit of darkening. I don't know if you can see that. That is a pretty good indication that that flour is starting to brown, so we want to add our liquid. Again, this is going to make a big mess, and it's going to clump up and look really terrible before it thins out, so don't panic. That actually wasn't too bad. I want to get every drop goodness out of here, because this is flavor. We're going to turn our heat all the way down. Make sure that all of our corners are mixed in. Oh, this smells so good, you guys. That we don't have any clumps. That's a little clumpy. I probably should have used a whisk when I was stirring that. And I'm just using the flat side of my spatula to squish any particularly lumpy bits that I might have in there. And we're gonna let this simmer on low for about 10 minutes. Because remember, those chilies, while they were dried, they were never cooked. And so we wanna give this a little bit of a cooked flavor to those chilies and not have them still be raw. And if this seemed too thick, I have my extra cooking liquid that I can add in there if I want to thin it out just a little bit. Yum. So good. All right, this might be a little done. I was running other errands and got slightly distracted. Oh, not bad at all. Having the lid on there really helps. So this has actually been cooking for about 15 minutes. Look at that beautiful red sauce. All right, so that's how you make New Mexican red chili paste at home. I am gonna have a separate video on doing adobado, but we're also gonna just put a spoonful of this over our breakfast eggs this morning. Recipe notes on this say makes about 2 cups. And it looks like it's gonna make just about 2 cups, a little over. So flavor-wise, this is slightly salty, not overly salty. It has just a tiny bit of heat, but certainly nothing super hot, and just incredible depth of flavor. So yummy. You get that little hit of oregano. The garlic is subtle. One of my favorite things on the planet. Absolutely delicious. So there you go, guys. New Mexico red chili paste. It's pretty easy to make and a great thing to do if you grow your own chilies. And this is made with New Mexico chilies, but honestly, you could do this with all kinds of dried chilies, and it would have different flavors and different levels of heat. But it's really, really delicious. So yeah, New Mexico red chili paste made from homegrown New Mexico chilies. Give it a try. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and leave me a comment. I have new content coming out every week.